Hello everyone, my name is Oliver Yang. I'm a partner at Reid Wise here in New York.
I'm Kelly Dixon. I'm also an attorney here at Reid Wise, and I work with Oliver.
Alright, so today we're sitting here in our beautiful Midtown Manhattan office and we want to talk about PERM.
Yes.
So the PERM process is basically a process for an employer to sponsor a foreign talent to come work in the US and permanently gain a green card through a program called EP2 visa category. And this is a very complex subject, right? I feel like, Kelly, a lot of times, a lot of employers, especially if you're new to this, you've never done an immigration sponsorship before, this is a very challenging area and there's so many landmines that you have to avoid. So we're going to talk a little bit about what you want to do when you're sponsoring your first or maybe your first few foreign applicants for a PERM application. So Kelly, why don't you tell the audience what is really PERM? What is really PERM like? What is it about?
Yeah, no, I agree, Oliver. It can be a really nuanced and confusing process, especially the first time around. So I think the most important thing to ensure the PERM process goes smoothly is to take care of a couple of preliminary matters first before you even start. And what I mean by that is finalizing the job description for the position and then also figuring out what your minimum requirements are going to be. And the minimum requirements have to do with not only the education requirements, but also the experience that's going to be required for the role. For example, if it's an engineering role, if there's specific coding experience requirements that are necessary, getting that written, and that is going to be the foundation for the rest of the PERM process.
Okay, so let's say if I were an employer who has no prior exposure to PERM and I just have an employee who comes to me and say, hey, I want to work for you permanently, so please give us a green card. Give me a green card. And the employer said, okay, so how do we determine, how do we go about determining whether this employee qualifies for the PERM application? How do we do the preliminary screening for the employer?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And so I think the first step is looking at the available role, the job opportunity that is open, and see what the minimum requirements are, and then check the employee potential candidate's background. It's really important to determine right at the beginning, at the get-go, that they meet whatever the minimum requirements for the role are going to be, because that's a critical component of the I-140, a successful I-140 application. And then I think the next stage of the process is, of course, you want to find good attorneys to kind of guide you through the PERM process. And I would like to think of PERM in 3 separate stages. First, you have to get and file a prevailing wage determination, which can take up to 6 months to process currently. So it is something that is time intensive. And basically that determines what the minimum wage is going to be for individuals in that role within the metropolitan statistical area. Once you get the prevailing wage determination issued, then you can move on to what I think many people consider to be one of the most confusing aspects of the PERM process, which is the recruitment stage. And that's when we're doing a test of the labor market to ensure that there are no eligible U.S. candidates that could qualify for the role. And a really brief overview of this stage of the process. So you have to, there's several components that you have to take care of. So you have to put a job application or a job advertisement with the state workforce agency. You also have to run a job advertisement for 2 Sundays, weeklies, with a newspaper that is in high circulation in the area. You also have to post a notice of filing for 10 consecutive business days at the worksite. And then you get the option of choosing 3 additional forms of alternative recruitment if it's a professional position. And once you've completed recruitment, then there's a 30-stage quiet period to wait, and then you can file your ETA 9089. So Oliver, that's a really brief overview for, I think, potential employers who are interested in undergoing this process for an employee.
And of course, the third step after the PERM is certified is you have to file the I-140, which is relatively the easiest part of the entire process. So you've touched on a lot of important subjects in the PERM field, which I don't think we'll have enough time or energy to go over everything in detail in this short video. But I do want to talk about a few things a lot of people are confused about. I guess number one is minimum requirements, right?
Yes.
So you mentioned minimum requirements a lot. But for a fresh new employer who doesn't know anything about PERM, it's quite a daunting task to figure out what the minimum requirements should be. So what are your suggestions, tips on finding out what the actual minimum requirements are for a particular job?
Yeah, so you have to look at the nature of the job itself. Do you require a bachelor's degree, in order to complete the role? And then you look at the job duties and how many years of experience are you going to require for the role. And it's really important to be realistic, because if you make the requirements overly difficult, the Department of Labor is going to look at that and think, well, that doesn't make sense for the job duties, right? So it's important that the job requirements match the job duties involved and the complexity of the job duties. So I think taking a look at the role and also looking at what other similar positions in the industry requires as their minimum requirements. That's also going to be something the Department of Labor is going to look at. And if you have requirements that are a lot more difficult or stringent than other job opportunities available in the same industry for similar and comparable roles, then that could lead to an audit or additional scrutiny from the Department of Labor. So I think it's really important to take a realistic look at what is going to be entailed in this job opportunity, and take a look at the candidate and make sure that it complements each other.
And another important jargon that you've briefly touched on is the prevailing wage, right?
Yes.
So the prevailing wage, a lot of employers, they don't know that there is a certain wage level that you have to pay the foreign applicant in order to get a successful PERM certified. So tell us a little bit about the prevailing wage, how it's determined, and how it's going to affect the whole PERM process.
Yeah, so that's right, Oliver. That's a really key component. You have to pay the employee above the prevailing wage that is issued by the Department of Labor. And how they determine the prevailing wage, there's a couple of components involved. So first of all, they're looking at the role, right? And the education level required typically for individuals in this role. They're also looking at your experience. If this is going to be a senior role, then it makes sense the prevailing wage is going to be higher, right? If this is a role where someone is, working at a more senior level, or they're overseeing individuals, or you're requiring experience that's like 5 years plus, then you're going to end up with a prevailing wage that's higher. It also depends on the metropolitan statistical area. Some areas where a lot of jobs are located, such as New York City or San Francisco, they are going to tend to have higher prevailing wages. Remember, the prevailing wage is determined by individuals within the same industry in that metropolitan statistical area. So the prevailing wage for an engineering job in New York City is not going to be the same as, perhaps in a different part of the United States that may be more rural or may not have as many, technology opportunities available, like Alabama or somewhere, So those are some of the things that goes into determining what the prevailing wage is going to be.
So if I am an employer and I know I want to hire John Smith, this foreign beneficiary, how do I know exactly what is the prevailing wage for John? Like what kind of analysis do we have to go through to figure out the exact floor of the salary that the employer will have to pay John?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things we can reference to get a sense of what the prevailing wage is going to be. So first, we look at that job description that we were talking previously and the minimum requirements, where we were saying, as a preliminary matter to have all this information prepared. So take a look at that and look at there's also what we call an occupational employee handbook that the Department of Labor references, and there is a section for every single job. So you'll want to see what SOC code that position falls under, and you can determine that based on the job details and what the duties will be.
So this is something an immigration attorney can help the employer with, right?
Exactly.
You're not on your own, basically. So as you can see, the PERM process is already very complex based on what we've discussed so far, but we really haven't even touched on the recruitment campaign, because the recruitment is actually the most taxing part of the entire process, because as an employer, you actually have to do work even if you have an attorney, right? So
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about what as an employer will have to do even with the lawyer's help. What do they need to do themselves?
Yes, so that's a great point, Oliver. There are parts of the PERM process where an attorney can only advise you and they can't really do for you, and it is going to require a lot of input from the employer themselves or their recruiting department. For instance, part of the recruitment stage, the whole purpose, once again, is to test the labor market, right? To make sure that there are no qualified U.S. applicants. So as a part of that, that means that you are going to have people applying to these job advertisements that you're putting up. And someone from the company needs to be reviewing these in a timely manner. It's really important that someone is tracking this information and that they're doing so in a timely manner. And if you get a resume and it seems like the individual qualifies, they meet all the minimum requirements on the face, then you will have to go to the next step, which you will offer them a phone call screening interview to see whether or not they meet all the minimum requirements. And that's why it's so important as a preliminary matter before you even start the PERM process that you make sure you have a clear understanding of what the minimum requirements are going to be. If you get a candidate that qualifies for all of the, qualifies for all the minimum requirements and the educational requirements, then unfortunately, the PERM process can't proceed. However, if you get an applicant who on the face meets all the requirements, then you must offer them a phone call and take it from there.
Okay, so let's circle back to one last important question that has always been asked by our clients, is the foreign language requirement, right? Say
Yes.
if I am an Italian company who only wants to hire Italian-speaking personnel, right? Can I list the language proficiency in Italian as a minimum requirement for the job?
So yes, you can, and there are definitely some roles where that makes sense, right? Where if you're primarily interacting with Italian clientele, where this knowledge would be critical and essential for the role. However, you want to keep in mind that this will open up the chances of getting an audit. U.S. or the Department of Labor, they love to audit cases where they see that a foreign language requirement is listed. And in that instance, if there is an audit issued, then you will have to prove that it's a business necessity to have this language requirement. The concern being, Department of Labor wants to make sure that you're not making the requirements too stringent, right? So that that qualified U.S. applicants couldn't apply. So you will have to prove that through documented evidence that the foreign language requirement is in fact a business necessity. So it is possible, Oliver, but it can delay the process a bit and add a little more complexity. So that's something to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. So if there's an audit, how long do you think it will add to the entire process?
It really depends. I think unfortunately, you know, when we're looking at PERM, processing times have just been longer across the board. I think the Department of Labor has really been dealing with sort of a backlog. So I would say it could add anywhere from 3 to 6 months of additional processing time.
Yeah, the PERM process by itself is a pretty long process, and it's just becoming longer and longer in recent years. Even if your foreign applicant is not from a country that is subject to a very long wait time, also probably will take 2 or 3 years, solid 2 or 3 years, for them to get a green card. So today we're talking about the normal PERM process for you to sponsor your employee to get a green card. But if you don't think this timeline fits your needs or the employee's needs, there may be other options, right? There may be O1 or NFW or even EB1A options that you can potentially do either with the employee or have the employee do it themselves. But that's a topic for some other day. I'm really glad that we're able to cover all the basics for PERM today. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. And we look forward to working with you in the future.